Ted Alex disappeared on Saturday, April 24th, 2004. When a person disappears without a trace, often the most critical information is hidden in their actions and words from the days before they vanished. Jeremy Alex's last known whereabouts may hold the clues to what happened to him. 28-year-old Jeremy Alex had a carefree approach to life.
He worked to live. He didn't live to work.
As a teen, he followed the Grateful Dead around the country.
He was definitely charismatic and had a sense of humor, and he had that draw.
But just before he disappears, Jeremy is discovered in a terrified state.
Very frightened, saying that people were threatening to hurt him, bad guys were trying to hurt him.
When extensive searches fail to find him, his family is at a loss.
We were questioning whether he was actually lost in the woods or if somebody had done something to him.
They suspect someone is hiding the truth.
And I truly believe that some of those people did know, never came forward.
Is Jeremy the victim of misadventure or foul play?
I've already played that worst-case scenario in my head multiple ways.
To his family and friends, Jeremy Alex is known as a free spirit who loves music, playing chess, and the great outdoors near his home in rural Belfast, Maine.
Jeremy was a minimalist, and up in Belfast, that's really the way of life. It's a town where all the hippies moved to, and that's just their mantra up there. Now, Jeremy's lived in places that had outhouses and no bathrooms, so growing up in Belfast, he just really always liked the juxtaposition of the ocean and the forest and the woods and the mountains.
In April of 2004, Jeremy's father and stepmother, Ted and Susan Alex, who live in New Hampshire, are making plans to visit Jeremy in Maine and take him out for a belated birthday celebration.
It was his 28th birthday. Ted and I didn't always get up to Belfast as much as we would like, so we called him and left him a kind of a funny message and told him that we would be coming up and that we wanted to take him out.
Once a rebellious teenager, in recent years, Jeremy has rebuilt strong connections with his family.
I saw changes for the positive. He had a share of issues growing up. His parents divorced, you know, he had a stepfather and I was a stepmother. And, you know, Jeremy was angry during his teenage years, but during his 20s, Jeremy really started to come around.
Ted is used to Jeremy going his own way. He knows his son has a bit of gypsy in his soul.
Jeremy was a free spirit kid, very intelligent, kind of earthy, did what he wanted to do. He lived, you know, different places in Maine. Also, he lived in California. He traveled around.
Jeremy's stepmother, Susan, came to love Jeremy like a son after she married his dad when Jeremy was 6 years old.
One of the driving pleasures and forces in Jeremy's life is music. He has cases full of CDs that he burned, and one of the bands that he loved was the Grateful Dead. When he was around 17 or 18, he started following the Dead. And for about 2 years, he basically went cross-country in a van following the Dead. And he made his living selling grilled cheese sandwiches out of the back of the van. So Ted and I would always joke that we knew he wouldn't starve to death because he had grilled cheese.
Kathy Langelier is one of Jeremy's closest and oldest friends.
He was extremely welcoming, really kind. You know, right away from when he first met me, I felt really at ease with him, and he had these great smiling eyes. We both loved music, so that was one thing that we instantly clicked with, the Grateful Dead and going to shows, so we had that in common. We had environmental concerns that were similar, and our eyes were big, and we wanted to make changes and in our own little ways.
As a child, Jeremy spent his summers with Ted and Susan, but lived most of the year with his mother in Belfast, Maine, a picturesque town of 6,000 plus people on Penobscot Bay. As an adult, it became his home base, the place he always returned to.
think Jeremy did odd jobs, whatever it took to make a living up in Maine, and I think it's very difficult to make a living up in Maine.
Jeremy was the kind of kid, you know, and I admired this about him. He worked to live. He didn't live to work. So he didn't make a lot of money, but he made enough money to live, and his needs were very simple.
Only 5 feet 7 inches tall, Jeremy is a short guy. Still, his former girlfriend, Suzanne Forkerin, says he could light up a room.
He has an exuberant personality, and, you know, instantly people are attracted and just want to hang out with him because he was fun.
But in the spring of 2004, some of his friends are growing concerned about him. Something seems to be altering his normally cheerful personality.
He definitely was not acting himself. He was paranoid, and I believe he was throwing out accusations, false accusations, because of this paranoia. That, of course, frustrated friends and left a lot of confusion, and he was starting to draw away from people, and he was mistrusting people.
Early on Monday morning, April 26th, Jeremy's dad, Ted Alex, turns his cell phone on. There's a message from Jeremy's phone, but it isn't from Jeremy. It's from the Belfast police.
They said that they had found Jeremy's cell phone, his keys, his van, and they were in the process of searching for him. When they found his cell phone, they basically saw Dad, called my number, left me a message.
Ted and Susan are mystified. They know their son is about to move into a new house in Northport, a village just outside of Belfast, with his girlfriend Suzanne. Jeremy's stepmother calls her right away.
It was probably about 7 a.m. She said the Belfast Police Department called. She said that they have his cell phone and they had found his van, and they won't tell her anymore.
Suzanne got upset about it, and she seemed more upset than I was, which sort of upset me, and she was gonna go over to the police station when we hung up, which she did.
Suzanne has reason to be upset. She knows something Ted and Susan do not. Suzanne last saw Jeremy Saturday morning, 2 days earlier.
I thought he was gonna pop a vein right then because he was huffing, puffing, and he wasn't in his right mind. He was disoriented and saying the bad guys were after him. He was like, the bad guys are after me.
Jeremy has been staying at their new house in Northport, getting it ready for the two of them to move into. On her way to the police station, Suzanne stops there. It is evident that Jeremy made it back there after his outburst on Saturday morning.
But when I got to the house, the door was open with the keys in the lock, and all the furniture he had moved was already in the house.
But there is no sign of Jeremy.
I hurried into Belfast to talk to the police, see what's going on, and when I got there, they told me nobody had seen him since Saturday afternoon. And it's like white just washes over you, and it's like weird. It's a weird feeling.
Coming up, an encounter with a desperate and disturbed Jeremy.
He was, according to the witnesses, hallucinating, in a panic, not acting normal, very frightened.
On Sunday, April 25th, 2004, police investigate an unlocked van parked in a small, secluded area of Northport, Maine. They find Jeremy Alex's cell phone, registration, and keys inside. They see a message on the phone from Ted Alex, Jeremy's father, and call him. Ted and his wife Susan immediately leave for Northport, Maine.
At first, we just thought, he was lost in the woods. I mean, obviously he had disappeared, but, maybe he had just got lost in the woods up there.
It was shocking, but at the same time, you don't really think anything horrific at that point. You just think something's not right, and you drive up hoping that, it's some sort of misunderstanding.
Meanwhile, Jeremy's girlfriend, Suzanne Forkerin, thinks back over events of the last few days. Events Jeremy's parents know nothing about. Jeremy and Suzanne have been together for more than 3 years. They met through mutual friends in Belfast, and she later followed him to a landscaping job in New York State.
I felt a draw to him and somehow knew before that we were going to be together.
There was this really strong bond between the two of them, and I think a lot of it had to do with that they were such good friends. It was a beautiful evolution to watch their relationship.
At first, Suzanne is attracted to the way Jeremy treats people and that he is a straight-up guy.
He wasn't smoking cigarettes, he wasn't drinking, he wasn't smoking. And, you know, to me, I was like, wow, that's cool, you know? He was straight edge almost.
But after they return to Maine, that changes. Belfast, like many rural communities, has problems with drugs. She discovers Jeremy is not immune to their attractions.
It was really weird because he wouldn't use all the time. Like every 6 months, he would go on like a weekend binge and I'd be, I'll just keep it out of my face. I don't want to know.
Recently, she says, Jeremy's drug use has become more frequent. The last happy day Suzanne and Jeremy spend together is Thursday, April 22nd. They travel to Sugarloaf Mountain in Jeremy's van.
And we went snowboarding. It was actually a really fun day. We all had fun. It was getting warm because it was in April, but there was still snow and slushy.
When they get home late in the afternoon, Jeremy seems eager to separate for the night, saying he is busy moving their things into their new house. But Suzanne is suspicious.
I imagined, okay, he's probably gonna go on a binge. And so I'm kind of stubborn. Like, once I get my feelings hurt, I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna call him. He's gonna do what he's gonna do. He can call me when he's done.
It is Saturday morning before she sees Jeremy again. When he arrives at her house, he is angry and accusatory.
He said, you and 2 other mutual friends of ours were outside my house last night with ski masks. And I'm all, what? That's when I realized it was cocaine because he wasn't in his right mind. I could tell when he started talking like that. I just started crying and I went into my room. You know, it was overwhelming. I'm sad and I'm in there crying.
Just as abruptly, Suzanne says, Jeremy's manner changes and he tries to comfort her and apologizes.
And he came into my room and he's like, I'm really sorry. If you need to talk, you know where I'll be.
But when she joins him downstairs, as he loads up some furniture to take to their new house, he is distant and ignores her pleas to tell her what's wrong.
And I'm like, you know what? He needs to go home, sleep it off for a couple days, and I'll talk to him, you know, in a couple days because this is not going anywhere.
It is 5:20 p.m., Saturday evening, hours after Suzanne last sees Jeremy, when a woman in a house off Pound Hill Road in Northport is startled by a young man erupting from the woods into her yard. She calls her husband over. The woman recognizes Jeremy Alex from his student days at Belfast High School, where she used to work.
She actually recognized Jeremy.
He looks agitated and is clutching cash in his hand.
The husband went over, saw that Jeremy was in a distressed condition.
He was, according to the witnesses, hallucinating, in a panic, not acting normal, very frightened.
Holly Edwards, editor of The Village Soup, was a reporter covering Jeremy's disappearance in 2004.
The circumstances as to how the eyewitnesses encountered Jeremy was the most unusual thing. He was saying that people were threatening to hurt him, bad guys were trying to hurt him.
He said that somebody was after him, someone was going to kill him. At that point, Jeremy offered the money that he had in his hand to the man if that person would let him go.
The couple doesn't know what to make of Jeremy's story. They try to calm him down, but when the woman goes to call 911, he panics.
He refused to stay with them, even though they were going to try to get him help, and then sort of took off in a panic, running again.
The couple reports the incident and identifies the young man to police as Jeremy Alex. As the weekend unfolds, nobody else sees or hears from Jeremy.
For 2 days, I just thought he was home sleeping it off, being stubborn and not calling him, and in all reality, he wasn't even at home. He was wherever he was.
On Sunday, the police go through Jeremy's van, parked near the house where he was last seen, and call Jeremy's father, Ted Alex. By the time Ted and Susan Alex arrive, it is Monday afternoon.
Everything was just as if, he got out of the van and planned on coming back.
Jeremy's girlfriend Suzanne and some of his other friends are already there and have been searching the neighboring woods on their own.
The woods in Maine are kind of treacherous. It's not like you're just walking to a park. You're kind of stumbling and trying to get through the woods and not get scratched up. And so, we just yelled and looked and just hoping that we would see him or something.
It was such a bizarre scenario. It was confusing. There were certain key things that Jeremy wouldn't normally leave behind, and he had, and I'm not sure why he was there.
It's stressful. It's a stressful feeling. Worry. People are starting to worry.
Ted Alex is concerned, but he is also still optimistic that Jeremy will be found soon. Yet he knows that his son will not be able to survive many more of Maine's cold April nights without shelter. He is comforted knowing that a full-scale search led by the Maine Warden Service, and including canine units and volunteers, is scheduled to take place the next day.
All the dogs and some of the searchers have tracking devices on them. They'll search a grid area. After the search, everything will be downloaded in a computer. They'll look at areas that might not have been searched, research them, and then go to the next grid area.
However, the extensive search fails to turn up any signs of Jeremy. Police accounts of his strange encounter with the couple in Northport have already reached his family and his girlfriend, Suzanne. Suzanne remembers Jeremy telling her that he thought people were after him. At the time, she thought his paranoia was due to drugs. But now, she begins to wonder.
Maybe there was somebody after him, because he mentioned it to me, he mentioned it to his friends, and he also mentioned it to the lady and the man that tried to help him at the end. Is that in his mind or from the drug use, or was it really happening?
Maybe what he was saying was in fact true, and it wasn't a hallucination. It was really what caught our interest and caught the community's interest.
News accounts of the search bring tips. A motorist tells police that a man resembling Jeremy crossed Route 1 on foot ahead of her on the Saturday evening he disappeared. When she passed him, she spied him in the rearview mirror, crossing back over the road again.
Where he was headed to is anyone's guess. Whether he was trying to get back home, whether he was oriented enough to try to get back home, it's hard to tell what he was thinking.
On Wednesday, April 28th, Jeremy's stepmother, now overcome with worry, vents her frustration on some of Jeremy's friends and acquaintances in the search party.
I literally said, if you know something, this is becoming life and death for Jeremy. If he's out there, it's cold, we don't have a lot of time. If he's not and something bad happened to him, you have to let us know. No one said anything.
Coming up, secrets are revealed.
I did try and hide the fact that there was drug use.
And suspicions grow.
We were questioning whether he was actually lost in the woods or if somebody had done something.
Jeremy Alex's strange disappearance makes headlines in Maine as soon as the official search begins.
In the beginning, they were absolutely just looking for someone who was in some sort of distress and then might have become hurt, lost in the woods. That part of Northport, there's not a lot of houses. They're few and far between, and so it would be very easy to get lost in the woods there. So I think it was just truly treated as a missing person, an unusual missing person in how it all came about, but really just as a missing person.
Ted Alex pursues every avenue he can to find his son.
He stepped in, and he's a kind of in-charge type person, kind of like Jeremy.
I rented a helicopter for 12:30, and we're going to go up and look some more.
And he was doing everything that he could do, because the time is critical, and it had already been 2 days before we even heard that he had disappeared.
Ted and Jeremy's stepmom stay in close touch with Suzanne, since she knows the community and was one of the last people to see Jeremy.
Susie was our connection with these friends of Jeremy's. We were just fish out of water up there.
Suzanne obviously had an insight to days before the event, which we didn't have. She had spent time with Jeremy. She knew his mindset, what he had been doing, where he had been.
Originally, Suzanne had tried to cover up Jeremy's drug use.
I did try and hide the fact that there was drug use because I was like, if he's found, I don't want him to get in trouble, you know?
When she first learned from police that Jeremy was missing, she went to the house they were moving into in Northport and cleaned up, flushing drugs down the toilet. That information comes as a shock to Jeremy's family.
We knew that he smoked pot, but never, heroin and cocaine. And that's what Susie had found and flushed down the toilet was, heroin and cocaine.
Those drugs obviously took their toll on him. Paranoid is a word that we heard a lot about his behavior the last 2 or 3 days. There probably were people that he was dealing with that were, unscrupulous, not the kind of people that you want your kid hanging around with.
A friend of Jeremy's tells the Alexes that she spent Friday night, the night before Jeremy disappeared, doing drugs with him at the house in Northport.
They had stayed up most of Friday night. They were doing cocaine and they were doing heroin. She left Saturday morning. When she left, she, was concerned that Jeremy should stop.
I finally did tell the police, okay, I went to his house and I tried to get rid of the evidence of drug use. And it got really overwhelming, and one of the state police or state detectives, he had me outside and he was just questioning me, like, you need to tell me where he got his drugs. They could have a bullet in his head. And
it was a double-edged sword for the police department because, there were drugs involved and they needed to deal with that.
Once the police begin looking into the drug connection, Jeremy's family says many of his friends seem to shy away from speaking to them.
I think they all cared about Jeremy gone missing, but I think they had hesitation when it came to giving information to the police.
Meanwhile, the efforts to find Jeremy continue. A second official search begins on May 2nd, 8 days after Jeremy was last seen. Friends cling to the hope that the wood-savvy Jeremy knows how to survive in the wild.
Jeremy was an extremely resourceful individual and clever, very clever. I think he could have survived, absolutely. Yes, I do.
he knew a lot about making fires. He could live out in the outdoors for a while.
But the search turns up no signs of him. Hopes for finding Jeremy alive in the woods begin to fade.
As the days went on and there were cold nights, we knew that it was inevitable that he wouldn't be alive. I mean, if he was still in the woods.
Perhaps Jeremy isn't in the woods. Could Jeremy, who's known to pick up and go on a whim, actually be somewhere far from Belfast, Maine?
You know, there was always in our mind a question whether he was actually, you know, a little bit like, okay, maybe he just took off.
Then, investigators get a lead from another motorist who saw Jeremy as she was driving on Pound Hill Road the afternoon he disappeared. She told police he was talking to two men in a red pickup truck.
That was a truck of interest. The police talked about it, and we were hopeful that it meant something.
The area where Jeremy's van was found in Northport, we subsequently learned was a place that was commonly used for drug activity. It's isolated, but it's easy to get to.
So they don't know if he went to this place to meet somebody.
The two guys, in my mind, sort of bolstered Jeremy's story that people might have been after him.
Months go by with no other leads. Then, in September of 2004, 5 months after Jeremy disappears, there is one final search over the terrain around Northport. The searchers find nothing. With the coming winter, the official searches will end. By now, Ted and Susan suspect that Jeremy is lost not to the woods, but to foul play.
As the time progressed, we were questioning whether he was actually lost in the woods or if somebody had done something to him.
Maybe he owed money to somebody, maybe they owed money to him. I don't know, but if you put two and two together, that's sort of what you come up with.
Coming up, the case is about to go cold when a stranger comes forward with tantalizing new information about Jeremy.
He said that he had Jeremy's license and he had his money. You know, you kind of think about how could this possibly be? It's been 4 years.
In the days after 28-year-old Jeremy Alex disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 2004, hopes were high that he would be found in the woods into which he was last seen fleeing. But months and 3 extensive searches later, those hopes die.
To have someone disappear, it's definitely unusual in any community, but I think that the circumstances surrounding how Jeremy appeared and then disappeared is what is really stymied the entire community.
From their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Jeremy's father, Ted, and stepmother, Susan, continue to monitor their son's case, poring over maps of the area where he went missing. The couple do what they can to keep Jeremy's disappearance in the public eye, putting up posters promising a reward which rises to $20,000.
The family was really good about keeping the media spotlight on as much as they possibly could. They had a website and they made regular contact with us.
There wasn't a lot to do but put posters out and talk to people. We would just go through and put these posters, you know, wherever we could.
The posters generate tips, some of them very disturbing.
There were a lot of rumors going around of foul play. Jeremy was killed, thrown in a granite quarry. I'd go up and search the quarries. Somebody heard that Jeremy was killed and buried or thrown in a well. We just followed the tips that I would get on the phone, unrelated to what the police were, you know, dealing with.
But Jeremy remains missing. Months after he disappears, his girlfriend Suzanne has a vivid dream that the two of them are together once more.
We were hugging and it just felt so real and so like the energy, and he actually is like, well, I have to say goodbye now. And then when I woke up, it felt like I'd really just been talking to him and hugging him. And it was pretty intense.
Jeremy's family and friends struggle with a sense of hopelessness. And then, almost 6 months after Jeremy's disappearance, there is a tantalizing new development. Tips come in that a young man resembling Jeremy has appeared out of the woods in another part of Maine.
There were some unusual sightings in Owl's Head, which is about a half an hour south of Northport, straight down Route 1. 2 people had reported seeing this person come out of the woods, not saying anything, looking very disheveled, and they swore that this was Jeremy, that it looked exactly like Jeremy.
Wayne Drinkwater owns a soup and sandwich shop in Belfast. He says he sees the young man on property he owns near Owl's Head.
I had seen the posters of Jeremy, but it looked just like Jeremy. And I asked him his name, and he didn't seem to be there. He didn't seem to respond. And I came back to Belfast, and I called the sheriff. And I said, I think I found Jeremy.
But when police pursue the lead, it turns out to be another dead end.
There just happens to be someone who looks very much like Jeremy, who has some mental health issues.
In a cruelly ironic twist, the lookalike's name is also Jeremy. He has been lost in the woods briefly after wandering away from his family. After the disappointment of the false Jeremy Alex sightings, Ted asks the Maine State Police to get involved. In 2006, more than 2 years after Jeremy's disappearance, they launch a special search of a local pond.
On August 25th, 2006, we found out that the state police were going to do a search at a pond called Knight's Pond in Northport.
someone had got arrested and told the police that her boyfriend or whatever said that he had killed Jeremy and threw him in Knight's Pond.
According to our information, they had gotten a tip that they should look in Knight's Pond, and they did. They sent a diver and searched the pond and didn't find anything.
2 more years pass by, with no apparent headway in the case. Then, in August of 2008, an intriguing new lead comes to Jeremy's dad. At first, he is suspicious.
Offering the reward, unfortunately, brought out some people that just were calling for the reward. So I, was really wary of this one email I received, one day from a gentleman that said that he had Jeremy's license and he had his money. You kind of think about how could this possibly be? It's been 4 years.
The email comes from Jim Baker, a retired California Highway Patrol officer who owns a restaurant in Searsport, Maine, just outside of Belfast. He hasn't followed the Jeremy Alex saga closely.
The one time that I think I can clearly remember reading or seeing something about it was a poster that was in the gas station with his picture on it, and it basically had his name and that he was missing. But I really didn't know much more about it other than that.
The story of how he comes to be in possession of Jeremy's driver's license and money is stranger than fiction. It begins on a night in April 2004, shortly after Jeremy goes missing.
My best friend that lived across the bay from us, Tim Dougal, he came in one night, started talking to me about how he had hit the big time or hit the jackpot because money was washing up on his beach. He and his wife had been out beachcombing like they did a lot of times and had started to find small denomination bills amongst the rocks, and he had pulled out a small wad of bills. I remember joking with him, telling him, well, you're buying drinks for everybody tonight, and he said, no, we collect stuff on the beach and we keep it, and so he put it back in his pocket, and that was the end of that for quite some time.
On April 23, 2008, almost 4 years to the day after Jeremy Alex disappeared, Jim's friend Tim is killed in a freak accident at his oceanfront property. When his widow Debbie returns to the weekend getaway, months later, she asks Jim to come over.
She started to relate the story about finding the money on the beach. And I remember asking her, you guys saved that money? And she says, oh yeah, it's all in there, buried under some sea glass and along with the driver's license that we had found at the same time. They kind of caused me to pause, and I don't know if it's my background or what it was, but I instantly had this strange feeling. And I said, did you guys ever contact anybody or anything? She said, no, we really didn't, think about it.
Inside a glass vase, buried in a collection of sea glass and other objects, Jim Baker finds the money and the driver's license.
I looked at it and saw Jeremy's face and his name, and I instantly remembered that poster. And I said to her, I said, Debbie, I think this is a kid that went missing a couple years ago or so.
Coming up, an important new clue shifts the search for Jeremy from the woods to the water.
A body would just be carried out straight down that channel right out into the ocean.
You would rather know than not, even if it's the worst case scenario.
It has been 4 years since Jeremy Alex went missing. Now, former Highway Patrol officer Jim Baker holds an important piece of the puzzle, his driver's license. Jim visits internet sites about Jeremy Alex and confirms that the license must have belonged to Jeremy and that he is still missing. He notifies the authorities.
I basically told him, look, this is who I am, where I live, and this is what I found. I think somebody needs to call me. In the meantime, nobody called me back for a while, and so I sent Ted an email with the same information.
Days later, the license and money that were first found on the beach in April of 2004 are in the hands of the state police.
The best that we could determine was probably within a couple of days of his disappearance. That's when they started to find the stuff on the beach. Jeremy was last seen with some money in his hand and then took off in the direction of the coast and in the general direction of Tim and Deb's house.
For Ted, it is one more terribly ironic twist.
We were in that neighborhood searching. We put posters up on the street where they lived. They just never put two and two together that this could possibly be a lost person. And that's the sad part about it, because 4 years, you know, there's not a lot of evidence, even if there was other things washed up on shore.
Ted goes back to the area and searches the rocky beach where Jeremy's license and money were found. For months, he returns, looking for another sign or clue that might lead him to Jeremy.
You know, if he was running towards the beach and towards the cliffs, disoriented, not sure where he was, frightened, whatever, you know, is it possible that he went off the cliff into the water?
But 4 years later, there is no further trace of Jeremy to be found here. These days, life in Belfast, Maine goes on pretty much the same as it always has. Historic houses grace the heights above the waterfront. Lobster fishermen ply the waters of Penobscot Bay alongside pleasure boats. Shops and restaurants cater to tourists who are just passing through. There is still just one stoplight in the center of town. The only late-night bar attracts the same loyal locals it has for decades. And Jeremy Alex is still missing.
We've had a missing poster since we got the first one in 2004, days afterwards. And when it starts to wear out from the sun, we print another one out. The family's been pretty good about, you know, sending us updates.
Ted calls, you know, the police that are working on it and, you know, may occasionally talk to them, but there hasn't been probably any movement, and at least that we know of, in maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and that's a long time.
The Maine State Police say they don't publicly discuss open cases.
The police have not shared with us directly any theories. I think that they believe, as the family does, that something bad has happened to Jeremy. It's still very much an open case to them.
Ted and Susan are divorced now. They say they're still close and united in their efforts to do anything they can to find Jeremy. Their biggest hope is that people who have been reluctant to offer information in the past might be willing to speak today, at least anonymously, to put their minds at rest.
And I truly believe that some of those people did know, never came forward. And we've tried. We've gone back up there. We've tried going to their houses. We've tried pleading with them just to let us know it would be anonymous, but nothing.
Jeremy's friend Kathy shares that hope.
I want to feel that somebody knows something. It hurts. I miss him. I loved him very much. And I'm going to always miss him.
Noting the extensive searches for Jeremy, which turned up nothing, Susan and Ted both say they now believe Jeremy is a victim of foul play. They think he was involved with some shady people over drugs and became their victim.
I don't think Jeremy's in the woods. I think he's in the ocean, finding his license wash up in money. I think he was running, and whoever was chasing him caught him, and they took him out and did something to him and dropped the body.
Jim Baker believes that Jeremy may have fallen from the cliffs onto the rocks and been swept out to sea.
I've talked to people that have spent a lot of years up here on the water, and they don't find it unusual that a body would not come back up, that it would just be carried out straight down that channel right out into the ocean.
It is truly a mystery. So many possibilities.
The house where Suzanne and Jeremy lived before he disappeared is abandoned now and neglected. It is the last place Suzanne ever saw Jeremy, and 16 months after he disappeared, she returned to her native California.
It's almost like a wound that won't scar. I'm pretty strong, so some of it I take as, okay, that's part of my life, and he was in it, and I'm happy that I got to spend the time I did with him. Once that happened, I realized, like, oh, I need to go spend quality time with my family because people aren't here forever.
She still has the dog, Gonzo, Jeremy helped her pick out.
He's a connection to Jeremy, and actually sometimes he reminds me of Jeremy because he's feisty and he's short and he's got an attitude.
Back in Portsmouth, Jeremy's father established a charitable fund to help kids at risk, called the Jeremy Alex Fund.
What I've tried to do is try to help other people or other kids not end up like Jeremy. And I think that's just a way of healing for me.
Because chess was Jeremy's favorite game, the fund gives out chessboards to all the fourth graders in town, along with instructions on how to play.
We go in, we talk a little bit about Jeremy. I keep it light. I talk about, chess is a lot like life. You make decisions and you need to be responsible for your actions. And so they make the right decisions and they realize the consequences of what they do to themselves doesn't just affect them, it affects their family forever.
Friends and family say they know that after all this time, it is unlikely that Jeremy's story will have a happy ending. And none of them believe it is possible that Jeremy could have gone off somewhere for years without ever contacting the people closest to him.
A Father's Day would go by, or my birthday, or Susan's, and we knew that he would always call. He was considerate like that. Even though he was a free spirit, he knew my cell phone number and he knew to call.
Jeremy had too big of a heart to put people through this, or to put Ted and his family and Suzanne and then the rest of his friends to have that emotional burden. I don't believe that Jeremy ever would do something like that. There would have been contact.
There's so much speculation around Jeremy's case because there are so many possibilities. He could still have just fallen into a well and could be out in the woods. But it could also be something, a part of a bigger piece of a puzzle, a group of people involved in something. We just don't know.
Brian Barton disappeared on Thursday, March 10th, 2005. When a person disappears without a trace, often the most critical information is hidden in their actions and words from the days before they vanished. Brian Barton's last known whereabouts may hold the clues to what happened to him. Brian Barton unexpectedly quits his band, and now he has disappeared.
I thought he had set out to kill himself.
And recent events only heighten the mystery.
She came to him and asked him to join the battle of good and evil.
With each passing day, suspicion builds.
Someone in that band knows what happened, and they don't want to share it.
Did Brian Barton disappear to start a new life? Or was he the victim of foul play?
We don't know what happened. We just know we have our son missing. And it's just a tough life.
"25-year-old Brian Barton has been playing guitar with his band called As Fate Would Have It for almost a year. Recently, things have started to take off.
I started to turn more into like a legit band, and we started playing good shows.
In fact, the band has just won a local contest to perform at their biggest show ever, the Taste of Chaos Festival in Seattle.
It's huge. I mean, we're talking like 6,000 people.
Brian went out and bought like brand new gear, like new amps, new pedals. He was totally stoked on it. He probably blew about, $2 or $3 grand on just pumping up his gear for this specific show.
Brian was very excited. He almost didn't believe it.
Brian Barton was adopted as an infant by Maureen and J.B. Barton. Together with his brothers Stephen and Adam, Brian had a carefree childhood in Vista, California, just outside San Diego.
He was very, outgoing, liked to talk to people, and he was very happy, He just thought life was good and he had a good time.
But in 2001, when Brian was 21, he decided he needed a change. He and his best friend, John Krebs, packed up and moved north to Seattle, Washington, to test their skills in the city's vibrant music scene.
A lot of music comes out of Seattle, so we figured it would be a good place to start and try something and see what happened.
The phrase I always remember is he said, "That's where the music scene is, Dad."
Brian was ready to move and get on and see what life held for him, so I was okay with it. Yes, my husband and I said, okay, fine, just keep in touch.
Over the next 4 years, Brian built a name for himself in the local punk rock scene and a serious relationship with his girlfriend, Brianna Duvall.
Brian and I were always friends. I'd say a good, 4 years before we even started dating. So we really didn't have a courtship before we started dating. We just really jumped into it, fell in love really fast, and it was exciting.
The couple quickly decides to move in together. Their new townhouse apartment is in Federal Way, a suburb of Seattle.
In the beginning, when they were all super in love, they would always be in Brian's room, like just avoiding the outside world, just locked in there.
Brian seemed to be in love with Brianna. He called me a couple weeks before and he said, "Mom, all I want is the wife, the kids, the house, the white picket fence."
He proposed 6 months into the relationship, you know, and that was it.
Everything in Brian's life seems to be on track. But by early 2005, Brian's relationship with Brianna, now his fiancée, begins to falter.
Brian and Brianna's relationship was interesting. Definitely had their good times, but there was definitely times where he would be kind of concerned. He was always wondering if she was flirting with the other guys, stuff like that.
According to his bandmates, Brian's relationship problems start to create some tension in the band.
Brian would come to practice upset about this or that, or some argument that they had, and he would stop practice to go talk on the phone and settle whatever problem was going on at the time.
He really liked her, you know, but she was kind of like young party girl, you know what I mean? Like, you know, not ready to be tied down.
In early March, just 1 week before Brian goes missing, his relationship with Brianna seems to reach its tipping point. Brian's band is playing a show at a bar in nearby Tacoma, and at one point in the night, Brian sees Brianna talking to another guy.
We played the show, and there's like one of her like guys, you know, like this guy that she was friends with, you know, but probably a little too friendly for his comfort level.
Brian immediately approaches Brianna and the friend.
Came up to him and kind of got in his face, and I was kind of like trying to get in between too, like, because I was suspecting Brian to throw a blow at him.
Basically caught her trying to hang out with some other guy, so those two were just getting volatile.
Over the next few days, the argument seems to affect Brian deeply.
After that show, Brian started acting strange.
I mean, it was like his personality changed. I mean, and I think his friends were even aware of that.
He just kind of started moping around a little bit more. He just wasn't as happy as he was. It seemed like he needed a change.
Brian seems to be struggling, trying to make a decision about his relationship with Brianna.
The day after the show at the Shipwreck, he came to our house and he was talking to me and my roommates about how he wanted to break up with Brianna. He seemed pretty upset, and we just kind of tried to talk to him and just make him comfortable and happy. And that's really only what our concern was at that time.
On Tuesday, March 8th, the conflict with Brianna comes to a head.
I was at work and he called me, and it sounded to me like he had had a long discussion with his friends, and he came to the conclusion that we just weren't right together. And we had just moved into that townhome, and I thought that we were on a different part of our relationship, and so it was pretty shocking.
To Brian's bandmates, however, the decision seems like a wise one.
I was relieved because Brian was relieved. That stress, that burden was off his shoulders, and you could tell that he was lighter because of it. And so I thought it was all said and done.
But in reality, Brian is already questioning his decision about Brianna.
He's like, yeah, I got rid of this girl, but like, ugh, I miss her, you know what I mean?
The next evening, on March 9th, Brianna stays home, hoping to patch things up with Brian.
I was beside myself. I was sitting drinking alone, hoping that he would show up and we can discuss it.
When Brian gets home, he and Brianna have a long talk, and they decide to give it another try. A few hours later, Brian calls Dylan, the bass player of his band, and makes a shocking announcement.
He called me and talked to me. You know, he said he wanted to quit the band, you know, and I was like, why? You know, he's trying to say, well, I just don't like the music, but then like the day before, he was just saying it was the best band he was ever in.
Dylan is angry that Brian quit the band, but Brianna is simply confused. According to her, the band was a positive part of Brian's life.
It was bizarre to me because he had just bought all this equipment, and they were talking about going to California and going on some tour, and it was a really cool opportunity, you know? So it was confusing.
To the band, however, it seems clear what has happened.
You know, he chose her over the band.
It was totally over, and then all of a sudden they were back, you know, totally teamed up and against the world.
Later that night, Brian still appears agitated. And then, with Brianna next to him, he makes a strange phone call to his best friend, John Krebs. Brian puts the call on speakerphone so Brianna can hear.
When Brian called us that day, he sounded very neurotic. He was not himself. It sounded like he was trying to get us to say something bad about her so she could hear it come out of our mouths, and he would have a reason not to be friends with us.
Brianna is further confused by Brian's strange and erratic behavior.
I mean, it was almost like a setup. It was really bizarre because he's loyal to his friends. He almost wanted me to hear that it's because of them that we broke up, or I don't know. It was bizarre.
Just hours after quitting his band, Brian now tells his friends that he has come to another decision, that he essentially wants to break all ties with them.
He didn't want to hang out with us or see us or, you know, have anything to do with us anymore. And the phone got passed around the room for a couple hours with everyone just trying to calm him down.
His friends think that between the pressures of his band and his relationship, he might be on the verge of a breakdown.
Like, everything was just adding up, and it was just like Brian holding the world, you know what I mean? It was just getting too heavy for him.
By the end of the night, Brian seems emotionally drained.
I think he felt alone. He was quiet. He stayed to himself. He slept on the couch and I slept upstairs.
But Brian and Brianna have one last conversation before they go to sleep.
I mean, he was crying and just beside himself, but it was something about, I don't think the world understands how much evil is out there, but how many good people still exist.
The next morning, Brianna feels hopeful that Brian's agitation may be subsiding.
So the morning of March 10th, I came downstairs and I saw that he had already gone to work, and I felt good about that. And I was off to work myself.
At Brianna's suggestion, Brian makes an appointment to see a counselor at 4 p.m. that day to talk about his anxieties.
So I was at work, and I called him. He was still at work, and he expressed to me that he was nervous about his counseling appointment. And I said, you know, well, that's natural, and I'm proud of you for, you know, making this move in your life. I think it's going to be really positive. He thanked me for always being there for him. And I said, of course, I love you, you know. And that was it. He didn't say goodbye.
Brianna doesn't know it, but this is the last time she will speak to Brian Barton before he disappears. Coming up, Brianna remembers an ominous conversation she had with Brian just a week earlier about a guardian angel.
But she came to him and asked him to join the battle of good and evil. And I asked him, how would that happen? And he said I would have to die.
Barton's band, called As Fate Would Have It, was about to play the biggest show of their career. Brian should have been savoring the moment, but instead, he unexpectedly quits the band. Now, he's gone to see a counselor at his fiancée Brianna's urging.
I think he struggled with more things than we're aware of, and he just didn't show that vulnerability to anybody.
At 5 p.m., right as his appointment is scheduled to end, Brianna calls Brian to see how things went. But he does not pick up.
I called, and his phone just went to voicemail.
Immediately concerned, Brianna leaves work early and heads home.
And I saw his truck was there, and I was like, oh good, he is home, you know. He is home.
But when Brianna goes inside the apartment, Brian is nowhere to be found.
And so I'm calling people, you know, I'm not highly concerned at this point until like an hour or two has passed. And that's when I was like, okay, well, his truck's out there. And I went and I opened up the truck, and that's where I saw his keys and his cell phone shut off. It was as if he was sitting in his truck and just sat it down.
Growing increasingly distressed, Brianna searches the rest of the apartment for any other sign of Brian.
But then I went upstairs and saw his clothes there, and those were his regular work clothes, and his wallet was in there.
When Brianna checks Brian's wallet, she is shocked by what she finds. Over $800 in cash.
This isn't normal for him. He doesn't leave his money behind. He doesn't leave his life behind like this. Something's going on.
Meanwhile, Brian's band is busy rehearsing for the big show a week later.
And like we were just jammed trying to figure out like how we're gonna do this without Brian. Was Rusty gonna try to play guitar, or was I gonna play guitar?
The band is also trying to reach Brian.
We're gonna call him and like just try to talk him into doing the show. You know what I mean? Like, yo, come on, let's just put our differences aside. You know, we need to play the show.
But their calls, like Brianna's, go straight to Brian's voicemail.
We couldn't get a hold of him, and that was when Brianna called freaking out because she was all, you know, Brian's stuff is all here, he's not here. I don't know where he is, can't get a hold of him, he's gone. So me and Ryan took off and went up to Federal Way and went looking for him. We got some flashlights, went, you know, walked around the trails, drove around, you know. There's a lot of little trails in the woods that are out there.
Back at the apartment, Brianna makes another disturbing discovery.
After I saw the wallet, I then was on a rant to see, okay, is everything really here, you know? He wore glasses and then contacts, and so the contacts weren't missing, but he was struggling with sleep as I was, so we had a bottle of Tylenol PM, and that was missing.
Brianna suddenly realizes what the missing bottle could mean.
When I saw the missing bottle, I thought he'd set out to kill himself.
She then remembers a disturbing conversation she had with Brian the week before.
We were laying in bed one night, and he just told me that his angel came to him. And I asked him, I was like, oh, that's a weird dream. And he said, no, she came to me. And I said, okay, that scared me. She was very real to him. But she came to him and asked him to join the battle of good and evil. And I asked him, how would that happen? And he said, I would have to die.
Brianna has not spoken to Brian since before his 4 o'clock counseling appointment. And now she fears he may have taken his own life. She calls her mother in a panic.
She didn't understand. I mean, it was confusing. She said, I think you need to call the police. And the police initially, they didn't want to file it as a missing persons, and that wasn't even what I was wanting. You know, it's like, I just need someone to be aware that something's going on.
And while Brianna talks to the police, Dylan and Ryan continue to comb the woods. But they don't find Brian.
So we did that for the whole night, and then we went back to their apartment and stayed there for a night.
The next morning, there is still no sign of Brian, so Brianna calls Brian's parents to break the news. Brian's father, JB, gets the message from Brianna on their answering machine.
I didn't know what to do. I called my wife and told her, and I said, we need to go ahead and find out what's going on.
JB also calls the Federal Way Police to follow up on Brianna's original report.
And they essentially said, you know, he can go missing if he wants. He's allowed to do that.
Police tell the Bartons that they will look into the case and that all they can do for now is hope that Brian turns up. But back in Federal Way, Washington, Brian's friends are coming to their own conclusions. Rusty, the singer of the band, gets an unexpected call from Ryan, the other guitar player, who lived with Brian and Brianna.
And he's like, well, I've been out here all night looking for him, and can't find him, and he left all of his stuff here. I think he's dead.
Rusty immediately questions Ryan's assumption.
My first thought is like, why would you automatically assume he was dead? You could have just gotten angry and, you know, spent the night at a motel or just slept under a rock or something.
Brianna, too, is hoping that Brian has simply walked away. She can even imagine what he might be thinking.
It's like, okay, I'm just gonna get up and go. You know, maybe this life that I started to form here isn't what I wanted, and I'm just gonna create a new one.
But as the weekend passes by with no word from Brian, it's harder and harder to believe there is a reasonable explanation for his disappearance.
We did pretty much everything we could that weekend to try to find him. I realized something was wrong when Sunday rolled around and I still hadn't heard anything.
Coming up, with no sign of Brian, his friends grow suspicious of each other.
I started to think that whatever happened that night, maybe some of my band members were involved in it, and that really freaked me out.
25-year-old Brian Barton has left behind all of his belongings and gone missing. Just before he disappeared, Brian had become extremely upset, breaking up with his fiancée Brianna and quitting his band. And now his friends and family are left to wonder, did he take off or did he take his own life?
He had definitely come to his boiling point with his life. Something had to give.
Brian has been missing for 4 days. Police support officer Darlene Deo is the first investigator to screen the case, and right away, she takes note of the length of time Brian had been missing before Brianna reported it to police.
Normally, a person would be missing for 8, 10, 12, 24 hours. Then someone would report them missing, especially an adult.
But in this case, Brianna reported Brian missing after just a few hours. This unusual aspect of the report catches Officer Deo's attention.
A flag went off in my head, and I thought, something's wrong here. It just didn't seem to add up to me. It didn't seem like it was as straightforward as it could have been.
Her first move is to contact Brianna, who fills her in on the details of Brian's disappearance.
In Brian Barton's case, there were some really unique circumstances that appeared right off the bat. He left all of his possessions behind. He had cashed his paycheck, his wallet was full of money. Everything that he had was left at the apartment.
Officer Deo also calls the counselor Brian saw the day he disappeared.
And she said that when Brian came in, he was depressed, he was sad, he was upset. His relationship with his girlfriend was off and on. And he brought up to her that, you know, because he was adopted, maybe that's why he has trouble with relationships.
But before Brian leaves the office, he apparently makes an ominous declaration to the counselor.
Now I know what I have to do. That was the last thing he said to her. Now I know what I have to do. And he left. And who knows what that means?
But as Officer Deo knows, it could simply mean walking away from his problems. According to friends, Brian often talked about leaving his life behind and becoming a drifter.
He talked more and more about, like taking off and getting rid of it, of all of his problems.
His favorite saying was, when time got hard, I'm just gonna go to Mexico and grow bananas, And he was a resourceful guy and I wouldn't put it past him.
I have to admit there was, in my mind, I thought, well, maybe he isn't, missing forever. Maybe he has just wandered off.
And it wasn't just the pressures of the band and his relationship with Brianna that have been weighing on Brian. Even before the visit to the counselor, Brian had been bringing up the fact that he was adopted and that one day he would try to meet his biological mother, who lived in Florida.
He was toying with the idea of, hey, if I decide to contact my birth mother, would you go to Miami with me? And I said, of course, And that was just a month before, and battling kind of the confusion beyond not wanting to hurt his adopted family, but wanting to know who he was.
Officer Deo must consider the possibility that Brian left everything behind to seek out his birth mother. But the idea that Brian just walked away seems far-fetched to some of his friends and family.
Would he leave? Would he do that to his family? Would he do that to his friends? Would he not contact anybody?
He needed people. He liked the people. I don't see how he could just drop everything. I don't think he could do that.
And when Maureen checks with the National Adoption Registry, It appears that Brian has not contacted his biological mother, which seems to rule out that theory. The other possibility, given Brian's strange behavior and the missing bottle of Tylenol PM, is that Brian took his own life. But according to Rusty, the singer of the band, Brian had expressed strong feelings against suicide.
Brian was a firm believer that if you commit suicide, you go to hell and rot in hellfire.
Brian's brother Adam also believes suicide is unlikely.
You don't take your life if you have something else out there. He had his family, he had his friends down here. He had a lot.
And when Officer Deo talks to Poison Control, she discovers that the amount of Tylenol PM left in the bottle was not enough to kill Brian. With no physical evidence pointing to suicide or a voluntary disappearance, Officer Deo has little to go on. Brian Barton has now been missing for 10 days. His father, JB, and brother Adam have come to Seattle to help with the investigation. They begin by visiting Brian's apartment with Officer Deo. Immediately, Officer Deo senses that something is not right in the apartment.
The environment in that apartment, in Brian's apartment that day, you could feel the tension. You could feel the electricity in there. And the vibe or the feelings in there was just, something happened there.
Officer Deo begins scanning the room for clues.
Does it look like there's been a struggle? Is there anything, maybe anything on the wall, a mark on the wall, maybe blood, maybe a hole in the wall, anything that would just, indicate anything that might have gone wrong?
And then she notices something strange about the screen door, which is sitting off its tracks on the back porch.
The aluminum frame was bent probably about a 30-degree angle.
Suddenly, Officer Deo's investigation takes a turn.
When I saw the screen door in that condition in Brian's apartment, I thought a struggle had ensued. Something had occurred in that apartment.
Coming up, band members find themselves at the center of the investigation into Brian's disappearance.
Went from Brian being missing to now like I'm a suspect for murder. It was very intense.
Brian Barton's friends and family have been searching for him across the Seattle area for 10 days, but they haven't found a single sign of his whereabouts. Now, Officer Darlene Deo is visiting his apartment, and she thinks she may have stumbled on a major clue that might point to possible foul play.
And I noticed the screen door was bent and off. It was sitting on the patio. And I asked the young people in the room, the band members, hey, what happened to the door?
But according to Officer Deo, they can't offer a good answer.
I don't know. I said, well, you guys live here. You don't know what happened to the door? I don't know. It was just like that, when we got home.
To Officer Deo, Brianna's and the bandmates' behavior is evasive and highly suspicious.
They didn't look at me directly. When they did, they couldn't hold that look for very long. It seemed that they were looking at someone sideways or behind me. At that time, I didn't know who that person was.
The person turns out to be Dylan Lorem, Brian's friend and the bass player of the band.
Now, he was rather nice to me for the most part, but he was sort of like, when you looked at other people around him, it's sort of like he commanded an era of, intimidation.
I felt that the band members, each individual I was speaking to, including Brianna, were checking with this guy. The warning flags were up and they were flying high, and I knew something had happened.
Officer Deo is convinced that the bandmates are hiding something.
I believe that all of Brian's friends and band members collaborated their stories in an effort to ward off law enforcement, ward off any detection, because those band members, some of them, maybe all of them, know exactly what happened to Brian. They just don't want to tell us about it.
But at this point, the police still don't have much to go on. the broken screen door alone is not sufficient evidence to name anybody a suspect. And Brian's family is beginning to lose hope that he is still alive.
I think for a long time I thought he would just come home. But then as things went on, I'm like, that, you know, he wouldn't do this. Something has happened to him.
One month has now passed since Brian went missing, and there are no new leads on the case. But then, one of the band members begins to grow suspicious.
I started to think that whatever happened that night, maybe some of my band members were involved in it. And that really freaked me out.
Rusty's suspicions force him to make a painful decision.
And that's why I quit the band.
According to Rusty, the other 3 band members become angry that he quit, which leads Dylan to post an ominous picture on a friend's MySpace page.
A picture that he had taken to glorify himself or send a message or whatever.
The picture is of Dylan, also known as Tank, holding a shotgun pointed directly at the camera. Dylan also makes a separate post that reads, "Rusty is ending my band. Ending him is my payback."
I started being afraid of my safety once I got the picture of Tank with the shotgun and all the threats. And that's when I contacted the detective.
Rusty takes the picture of Dylan to the Federal Way Police Department to show Officer Deo.
I mean, you could tell this kid was scared. And I asked him why he would be scared. And he said, well, I left the band. And Dylan's mad. And I thought right away, Brian left the band. Was Dylan mad then? What happened?
But according to Dylan, the picture was just a harmless prank.
I mean, if I had really done something to Brian, would I just go and post up a picture like that the next day? It's absurd to me.
Still, Dylan's MySpace post only increases Officer Deo's suspicions.
Someone in that band knows what happened, and they don't want to share it. They don't want us to know. They don't want to suffer the consequences. But boy, Brian sure did, didn't he?
But without any physical evidence, Officer Deo's hunches lead nowhere. In May, the missing person case of Brian Barton is finally assigned to a detective at the Federal Way Police Department. But before Officer Deo turns over the reins, she gets a strange call from one of the band members.
I believe it was Ryan. Said he was moving out, and everyone boogied out of the apartment.
And as Ryan explains, he isn't the only band member with an itch to leave town. Apparently, Dylan has already moved to Los Angeles, just 2 months after his friend went missing. But according to Dylan, there's nothing suspicious about his move.
I went to LA because I had an offer from a friend to do some recordings. It was no secret I was going to LA. You know, I let everybody know. I told everybody, I told all the friends, you know what I mean? But it was not like, you know, I'm trying to escape from anything. It was, you know.
In fact, Dylan says he tried to call the Federal Way Police numerous times.
If somebody would have said, hey, Dylan, we need to question you, I would have been all like, okay, let's go. Yeah, I wanted that, to be honest with you, because I wanted to, you know, give my side of the story.
But according to Dylan, no one at the police department will talk to him, and the accusations are starting to take their toll.
I started being very alienated, and, you know, like a lot of people I thought were my friends, you know, turned out not to be my friends. Went from Brian being missing to now, like, I'm a suspect for murder. It was very intense.
The detectives in charge of Brian's case are finally ready to ramp up the investigation, and they begin by bringing in potential suspects for questioning.
In this case, we really didn't have a suspect. We had more persons of interest. Brianna and Ryan and Dylan, everyone seemed to point us in the direction of those 3 as knowing who or what may have happened to Brian.
It was Dylan who had argued with Brian about quitting the band and posted threatening messages to Rusty. And even though Ryan and Brianna lived in the apartment with Brian, they were unable to tell Officer Deo how the screen door was damaged.
The first active step that I took is I went out and contacted his girlfriend, Brianna Duval, and asked her if she'd come down the station and do an interview.
Brianna is unprepared for the visit.
came to my house and knocked on the door, and I was kind of in my pajamas and get yourself together, you're going to the police station right now. It was 5 in the morning, they came and dragged me out of bed.
Detective Laird takes Brianna into a room at the police department headquarters, recording her interview on a hidden camera.
I told him what I told him, and I felt like it was okay, you know. But little did I know I was like one of the suspects, you know? I mean, and with no reason.
Brianna tells police again about the events leading up to March 10th.
2 days before Brian was missing, he broke up with me, quit the band, and then the day before he was missing, called his friends.
Detectives also interview Brian's friends and other bandmates, except for Dylan, who is still in LA.
My impression of Brianna, Ryan, and Dylan was that they all were kind of pointing fingers at each other as to what could have possibly happened to Brian. If something foul play had taken place, they felt that either Brianna had done it or Dylan and Ryan had probably done it.
In fact, some of Brian's other friends seemed to point fingers at Dylan as well, if only because of his size.
When the police were interviewing us, one of the questions was if anyone could have killed Brian, who could it have been?
Would you feel there was anybody in your group of people that was capable of doing it?
And I think the majority of the people said Dylan, based on the fact that he was a big guy.
Detectives take their next step, thoroughly searching Brian, Brianna, and Ryan's apartment.
So they contacted the manager at the apartment complex, and they went to the apartment and checked it out.
Detectives hope it's not too late to find some relevant shred of evidence. Coming up, detectives come upon a shocking new clue.
There was some kind of body that had been buried in that area.
The Federal Way Police believe that 2 of Brian's bandmates, Ryan and Dylan, and Brian's fiancée, Brianna, may know more than they are saying about Brian's disappearance. And now that Ryan has vacated Brian's old apartment, detectives are able to inspect the property for any signs of foul play without a warrant.
When I went to the apartment, we started looking around, just looking for any kind of fresh paint or anything that would show some kind of struggle.
If there was violence, if something happened in the apartment, can we find anything that can connect that? Can we connect the dots in any way?
But the apartment isn't the only place detectives are looking for clues. With more and more suspicion focusing on Dylan and Ryan, police decide to search Dylan's grandmother's property. It's where the band used to practice and where Dylan and Ryan claim to have been on the night of Brian's disappearance.
When I was at the apartment at the same time, Detective Wells and several other detectives were at Dylan's grandma's house just outside of Bellevue.
Detectives bring cadaver dogs to the property, and they're looking for one thing: the body of Brian Barton.
They had dogs, and they were going to search the property, and he would get back to me. I was like panicked.
Dylan can hardly believe what's happening.
I was guilty until proven innocent, you know? I mean, like, everybody had thought that I had done it.
But then, a cadaver dog zeroes in on a patch of ground in the backyard.
The cadaver dog had hit on a site that had been disturbed and recently dug up.
And when a cadaver dog hones in on a specific spot, it usually means one thing.
There was some kind of body that had been buried in that area.
Meanwhile, back at the apartment on Southwest Campus Drive, Detective Laird makes another discovery: a large stain in the carpet.
My initial thought on the stain is that it was possibly blood.
Detective Laird and his partner conduct a quick field test.
And the initial field test did come back positive for blood.
But Detective Laird still needs the Washington State Crime Lab to verify the findings with a more extensive test. If these findings come back positive, they could be the linchpin of the investigation.
I thought, you know, this was gonna be something that would tell us if there was some kind of foul play and give us some evidence to start understanding maybe what had happened to Brian.
Detectives now wonder, did bandmates Dylan and Ryan possibly murder Brian Barton in the apartment and bury his body on the property of Dylan's grandmother in Bellevue? Or was there an altercation that resulted in an accidental death, which Dylan, Ryan, and Brianna are now covering up? For Brian's family, the answer could bring even greater despair.
I mean, it's like your worst nightmare. You know, you kind of like try to think about it, and then you're like, okay, no, I'm just gonna wait till I hear from them.
The news also increases the suspicions of Brian's friends.
At first, I didn't think Dylan had anything to do with it, but the fact that the police were involved and had gone to his grandma's house where they practiced with cadaver dogs, it just made me wonder.
The Washington State Mobile Crime Lab tests the carpet, the pad, and the concrete floor of the living room in the apartment. And all 3 tests come up negative. There is no trace of human blood in the stains.
At that time, it was very frustrating because we weren't able to find any more evidence of any kind of struggle in the apartment.
Meanwhile, police find out that the patch of disturbed earth does contain a body, but not that of Brian Barton.
A family dog died, and we had buried it in the back. And obviously the cadaver dogs had found or smelled the dog out.
The next day, Maureen follows up with police.
I said, what'd you find? And he goes, oh no, it was a dog. I was like, okay, that's good, but then I still have no answers.
With no more leads to follow, the search for Brian Barton, whether he's dead or alive, goes cold. Two years go by, and still no one has heard from Brian.
We don't know what happened. We just know we have our son missing. And it's just a tough life.
I want to think that Brian just walked away. I want to think that he disappeared just to get away from everything, start over, jump in trains. He might be on the East Coast, Midwest, who knows. I want to think that.
And then, in June of 2007, the Federal Way Police make a renewed attempt at finding the truth. They request voluntary polygraph tests from Dylan, Ryan, and Brianna.
I was like, yeah, no worries, you know? Anytime they would have asked me to come in, I would have came in and talked to them.
According to official police documents, all 3 pass the polygraph tests, and their names are cleared.
At this time, Dylan Lorm's no longer a person of interest. Neither is Brianna Duval or Ryan Bruce.